The winter wind cut through the Nevada mountains like a blade, and Xavier Cole heard the cry before he saw anything through the driving snow. He had been riding through the high country near Truckee, California, trying to reach the town before the storm worsened, but that sound stopped him cold. It was not the howl of a wolf or the screech of a mountain cat. It was a baby, and no infant should be out here in this killing cold. Xavier urged his horse forward, squinting against the white fury of the blizzard. The year was 1877, and he had seen many hard things in his 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that met his eyes when he crested the small ridge. A covered wagon sat tilted at an angle, one wheel broken, half buried in snow. Near it, a woman knelt in the drifts, clutching a bundle to her chest. She looked up at him with eyes that held both desperation and the beginning of resignation. "Please help," she said, her voice barely carrying over the wind. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. "My baby, please, my baby." Xavier dismounted immediately, his boots sinking deep into the powder. "I will," he said, reaching her in 3 long strides. He could see she was shaking violently, her lips blue with cold. "Madam, we need to get you both out of this weather right now." The woman looked up at him with gratitude flooding her features, but he could see she was too weak to stand. The bundle in her arms let out another wail, thin and frightened. Xavier acted on instinct, pulling off his heavy coat and wrapping it around both mother and child before lifting them both into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and that worried him more than anything. "My horse," she whispered. "In the wagon." Xavier looked at the tilted wagon and saw a draft horse still in the traces, its head hanging low. He could not leave the animal to die, but he also could not waste time. He carried the woman and baby to his own mount, a sturdy gelding named Copper, and managed to get them positioned in the saddle. Then he moved quickly to free the draft horse from the broken wagon, tying its lead to his saddle horn. "Hold on," he told the woman, swinging up behind her and gathering her against his chest. The baby was pressed between them, and Xavier could feel the tiny heartbeat against his ribs. He turned Copper toward the direction he knew Truckee lay, praying they could make it before the storm claimed them all. The ride was brutal. Xavier kept his arms locked around the woman, who sagged against him, barely conscious. He talked to her the whole way, forcing her to stay awake. "What is your name?" he asked, his lips close to her ear so she could hear him. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Foster." "I am Xavier Cole," he told her. "Stay with me, Clara, stay awake. Tell me about your baby." "Grace," Clara murmured. "Her name is Grace. She is 6 months old." "Grace is going to be fine," Xavier promised, though he was not sure of anything in that moment except the need to keep moving. "You both will be fine." It took another hour of riding through the blinding snow before Xavier saw the lights of Truckee glowing in the distance. The town sat nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, a rough collection of buildings that served the railroad workers and travelers passing through. It was not much, but it had shelter, and that was all that mattered. He rode straight to the doctor's house, a small structure near the center of town with a painted sign hanging from the porch. Xavier dismounted, pulling Clara and the baby down with him, and kicked at the door. "Dr. Mitchell, open up." The door swung open to reveal a gray-haired man with spectacles, who took one look at the scene and ushered them inside immediately. "Get them by the fire," Dr. Mitchell commanded, and Xavier obeyed, carrying Clara to the chair nearest the stove. The warmth hit them like a wall, and baby Grace began to cry harder, her small face red and scrunched. Clara tried to soothe her, but her hands were shaking too badly. Xavier knelt before them, unwrapping his coat carefully while the doctor brought blankets. "How long were they out there?" Dr. Mitchell asked, his hands moving expertly over Clara, checking her pulse and temperature. "I do not know," Xavier admitted. "I found them maybe 2 hours ago, but they could have been there longer." The doctor nodded grimly. "She has hypothermia." "The baby too, but children sometimes fare better than adults in the cold. Get that wet clothing off her and wrap her in these blankets. I will prepare a warm bath, not too hot, or it will shock her system." Xavier hesitated, propriety warring with necessity, but Clara looked up at him with those desperate eyes. "Please," she whispered, "help Grace first." He took the baby from her arms and for the first time got a good look at the infant. Grace had her mother's dark hair, just wispy curls on her small head and blue eyes that stared up at him with confusion. She was soaked through, her little dress frozen in places. Xavier had never undressed a baby before, but he worked carefully, peeling away the cold fabric while the doctor returned with warm water and cloths. Together, they warmed little Grace, rubbing her limbs gently and wrapping her in heated blankets. The baby's cries gradually subsided into whimpers, and then into exhausted silence as she fell asleep. Only then did Xavier turn his attention back to Clara. She was unconscious now, her head lolling against the chair. Dr. Mitchell had removed her outer garments and wrapped her in blankets, but her skin still looked too pale. "Help me get her into the bath," the doctor said, and Xavier lifted her again, carrying her to the next room where a copper tub sat steaming. They lowered her into the water fully wrapped in a sheet for modesty, and gradually her body began to respond. Her eyelids fluttered and she gasped, her hands gripping the sides of the tub. Xavier found himself holding one of those hands, steadying her. "You are safe," he told her. "You are in Truckee at the doctor's house. Grace is sleeping by the fire." Clara turned her head to look at him, really look at him for the first time. Her eyes were brown, he noticed, a deep warm brown that seemed to hold questions and gratitude in equal measure. "You saved us," she said, her voice hoarse. "Any man would have done the same," Xavier replied, but they both knew that was not true. Not every man would have stopped in that storm. Not every man would have carried a stranger and her child through a blizzard. Dr. Mitchell returned with a cup of warm broth. "Drink this slowly," he instructed Clara. "You need to get your strength back. What were you doing out on that mountain road in this weather?" Clara took the cup with shaking hands. "My husband died," she said quietly, 3 weeks ago of fever. We were traveling from Nevada, trying to reach my sister in Sacramento. The wagon wheel broke and I could not fix it. I tried to shelter us, but the storm came so fast." Xavier felt something twist in his chest at her words. A widow, alone with an infant trying to make her way through the mountains in winter. It was a desperate situation and she had been hours from death when he found her. "You have family in Sacramento?" Dr. Mitchell asked. Clara nodded. "My sister Margaret, she married a merchant there." "She does not know about Thomas, my husband. I have been trying to reach her." "Well, you will not be traveling anywhere for several days," the doctor said firmly. "You need rest and warmth. The baby too. Xavier, I assume you can see that their horses are settled." "Already done," Xavier said. He had tied both horses at the hitching post with blankets thrown over them. "I will take them to the livery once the storm passes." "You should get some rest yourself," Dr. Mitchell observed. "You look half frozen." Xavier realized he was still wet through, his clothes stiff with ice in places. He had been so focused on Clara and Grace that he had not noticed his own discomfort. "I will head to the boarding house," he said, but he found himself reluctant to leave. He looked at Clara, who was watching him with those brown eyes, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. A connection, perhaps, or just the bond forged by shared survival. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "I do not know how to repay you for what you did." No repayment needed, Xavier told her. Just get well. Both of you. He left the doctor's house and walked through the snow to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, where he rented a room by the week. The elderly proprietor took one look at him and insisted he sit by her kitchen fire while she heated water for a bath. Xavier was too tired to argue. He sat, watching the flames dance, and thought about the woman and baby he had pulled from the storm. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Xavier woke early, as was his habit, and after dressing in dry clothes, he walked back to the doctor's house. He told himself he was just checking on their welfare, being neighborly, but the truth was he had barely slept for thinking about Clara Foster. Dr. Mitchell answered his knock and smiled. "They had a good night," he reported. "The baby is eating well and Mrs. Foster's color is much improved. Come in. I am sure she would like to thank you properly." Xavier found Clara sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a quilt, with Grace in her arms. In the daylight, with her hair dried and brushed, she was beautiful. Not in a flashy way, but in a quiet, steady way that drew him. She looked up when he entered and smiled, and Xavier felt that smile reach someplace deep inside him. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I hoped you would come. I wanted to thank you again when my head was clearer." "Xavier, please," he said, taking the chair the doctor offered. "And there is no need for thanks. How are you feeling?" "Much better," Clara assured him. "Dr. Mitchell says we were very fortunate. Another hour in that cold and we might not have made it." Xavier nodded, not wanting to dwell on that possibility. "What will you do now?" "The pass to Sacramento will not be open for weeks, maybe months, if this winter is as hard as I think it will be." Clara's expression grew troubled. "I know. I had not thought that far ahead. I have a little money, enough for room and board for a few weeks, but then—" She trailed off, looking down at Grace, who was making small cooing sounds. "Truckee is not a bad place to wait out the winter," Xavier found himself saying. "There are decent folk here. I could help you find a place to stay, somewhere safe and warm." "That is very kind," Clara said, her eyes meeting his. "But you have already done so much, I cannot ask more of you." "You did not ask," Xavier pointed out. "I am offering. The truth is, Clara, I would like to help, if you will let me." There was a moment of silence while Clara studied his face, as if trying to understand his motives. Xavier was not entirely sure of them himself. All he knew was that the thought of this woman and her baby struggling alone in a harsh mountain town did not sit right with him. "Why?" Clara asked finally. "You do not know me. Why would you do this?" Xavier considered his answer carefully. "Because I found you in the winter wind and you asked for help and I said I would. That does not end just because the immediate danger is past. You need help and I can give it. It is as simple as that." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It has been so long since anyone was kind to me," she whispered. "Thomas, my husband, he was a hard man, not cruel but hard, and after he died I felt so alone. You cannot know what it means to me that you stopped, that you did not just ride past." Xavier felt anger on her behalf, though he kept it from his voice. "Any decent man would have stopped," he said again. "Perhaps," Clara said, "but you are the one who did, and I am grateful, Xavier, truly." Over the following days, Xavier made good on his promise. He found Clara a small house at the edge of town, owned by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who was willing to rent it cheaply in exchange for Clara helping with sewing and mending. He repaired the broken wagon wheel and sold the wagon and draft horse, giving Clara the money to help her through the winter. He brought firewood and supplies, never asking for anything in return. At first, Clara protested his generosity, but Xavier was persistent. "Let me help," he said simply, and eventually she stopped arguing. He found himself visiting the little house every day, ostensibly to check on their welfare, but really just because he wanted to see Clara. He would sit at her small table and drink coffee while she sewed, and Grace would play on a blanket at their feet. They talked about everything and nothing. Clara told him about her life before Thomas, growing up in a small town in Missouri, dreaming of seeing the wider world. Xavier told her about his years as a cowboy, working ranches from Texas to Montana, never settling anywhere for long. "Why not?" Clara asked one afternoon, her needle pausing in its work. "Did you never want a home of your own?" Xavier considered the question. "I suppose I never saw the point," he admitted. "A home needs people to fill it, a family. I never had that." "What about your own family? Parents, siblings?" "My parents died when I was young," Xavier said. "Cholera. I was raised by my uncle on his ranch in Texas, but when I was 16 I struck out on my own. I have been drifting ever since." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. "It was," Xavier agreed, surprising himself with the admission. "It is." Their eyes met across the table and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Clara had been lonely too, Xavier realized. Lonely even before her husband died, trapped in a marriage that had not fulfilled her dreams. As the weeks passed and winter deepened its grip on the mountains, Xavier found his feelings for Clara growing stronger. He had not meant to fall in love with her. She was a widow, still mourning her husband with a baby to care for. She needed a friend and protector, not a man's romantic attentions. But Xavier could not help the way his heart lifted when he saw her, or the way he looked forward to their daily visits like a man dying of thirst looks forward to water. He tried to keep his feelings hidden, but he was not sure he succeeded. Clara had a way of looking at him sometimes, her brown eyes searching his face, as if she could see right through to his soul. It unnerved him and thrilled him in equal measure. One evening in late January, a month after he had found Clara and Grace in the storm, Xavier arrived at the little house to find Clara in tears. She was sitting by the fire, Grace asleep in her cradle, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Xavier was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. "Clara, what is wrong? Is Grace ill?" "No, no," Clara said, wiping at her eyes. "Grace is fine. It is me. I am sorry I should not be crying. It is foolish." "It is not foolish," Xavier said firmly. He pulled a chair close to hers and sat, taking her hand in both of his. "Tell me what has upset you." Clara took a shaky breath. "I received a letter today," she said, "from my sister Margaret. The mail finally got through from Sacramento. She wrote to say that she is happy to have me and Grace come stay with her, but her husband is not pleased about it. He thinks we will be a burden. Margaret said we are welcome, but I can read between the lines, Xavier. We will not truly be wanted there." Xavier felt a surge of protective anger. "Then do not go," he said. "Stay here in Truckee. You have a home here, friends. Mrs. Patterson adores you. Half the women in town have brought you pies and offers of help." "But what will I do for money?" Clara asked. "I cannot live on charity forever." "And you, Xavier, you have been so generous, but I cannot keep taking from you. It is not right." "What if you were not taking?" Xavier heard himself say. "What if I was giving freely because I wanted to? Because you and Grace have become important to me?" Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Xavier, what are you saying?" He knew he should stop, should retreat behind propriety and friendship, but he could not. The words came pouring out. "I am saying that I care for you, Clara, more than I should, perhaps. I think about you all the time. I lie awake at night wondering if you are warm enough, if you have everything you need, if you are happy. I look for reasons to come see you, just to hear your voice. I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving Thomas, but I cannot help how I feel." Clara's hand tightened on his. "Xavier," she breathed, I thought I was imagining it. I thought it was just me. What do you mean? Xavier asked, hardly daring to hope. I mean, I feel it too, Clara said, tears streaming down her face now, but these were different tears. I have tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, that it was not proper, that I should be mourning. But the truth is, Xavier, I never loved Thomas the way a wife should love a husband. Our marriage was arranged by our families. I barely knew him when we wed, and in the years we were together, I tried to be a good wife, but I never felt for him what I have come to feel for you. Xavier's heart was pounding so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. What do you feel? He asked, needing to hear her say it. I feel like I have been waiting my whole life for you, Clara said simply. Like every hard thing I went through was leading me to that moment in the storm when I looked up and saw you riding toward me. You are a good man, Xavier Cole, the best man I have ever known. And I think if you are patient with me, I could love you with all my heart. I think I already do. Xavier pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. I will be patient, he promised. As patient as you need me to be. But I will not let you go to Sacramento. Stay here with me, Clara. Let me take care of you and Grace. Let me be the family you need. Yes, Clara whispered against his chest. Yes, Xavier, I want that more than anything. They sat there for a long time, holding each other, while the fire crackled and Grace slept on, unaware that her life had just changed in the most fundamental way. When they finally pulled apart, Xavier cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. I will do this right, he told her. We will court properly, give the town nothing to gossip about, and when enough time has passed, if you are willing, I would be honored to make you my wife. Clara smiled through her tears. I am already willing, she said, but I understand. We will wait. We will do things properly. But Xavier, know that my heart is already yours. The next months were the happiest Xavier had ever known. He continued to visit Clara and Grace every day, but now there was an openness to their affection, a freedom to their conversation. They talked about the future, about the life they would build together. Xavier told her about a piece of land he had been eyeing, just outside town, with a good meadow and a creek running through it. He had been saving his wages for years, moving from job to job, never spending much because he had nothing to spend it on. Now he had a reason to use that money. We could build a house there, he said one evening, Grace on his lap, her small hand wrapped around his finger. A real house, big enough for a family, with a garden for you and a barn for horses. I could take work at the lumber mill or hire out as a guide through the mountains once I know the trails better. We would not be rich, but we would have enough. It sounds perfect, Clara said, her eyes shining. I do not need riches, Xavier. I just need you. In March, when the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared in the greening meadows, Xavier asked Clara to marry him officially. He had bought a simple gold band from the jeweler in town, and he got down on one knee in her little house while Grace babbled happily on her blanket. Clara Foster, you came into my life in the midst of a winter storm, and you brought light and warmth with you. You and Grace have given me a reason to stop drifting, a reason to build something permanent and real. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Clara said, pulling him up and into her arms. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in late April, when the wildflowers were blooming on the hillsides. It was a small ceremony in the Truckee church, with Dr. Mitchell standing as Xavier's witness and Mrs. Patterson as Clara's. Grace, now almost a year old, wore a white dress that Clara had sewn herself, and she giggled throughout the ceremony, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed Clara with all the love he had been holding inside for months. She kissed him back with equal passion, and the small congregation cheered. Afterward, there was a celebration at the boarding house with food and music and dancing. Xavier danced with his new wife, and then with Grace in his arms, spinning the little girl until she shrieked with delight. "I never knew life could be this good," he told Clara later as they walked back to her house, which was now their house. "I never imagined feeling this happy." "Neither did I," Clara admitted. "When I was out in that storm, holding Grace, I thought we were going to die. I prayed for a miracle and you appeared. You are my miracle, Xavier." "And you are mine," he replied, kissing her again under the stars. They spent the summer building their home on the land Xavier had purchased. It was hard work, but good work. Xavier did most of the heavy labor, cutting timber and hauling stones, while Clara helped where she could, and other men from town came out to lend a hand, as was the custom. By September, they had a sturdy house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. It was not grand, but it was theirs, and it felt like a palace to both of them. Grace took her first steps in that house, toddling from Clara's arms to Xavier's while they both encouraged her. Xavier felt a surge of pride and love as the little girl called him Papa, a name she had started using without anyone teaching her. He was not her father by blood, but he was her father in every way that mattered, and he loved her as fiercely as any man could love a child. That fall, Clara discovered she was expecting another baby. She told Xavier one evening after they had put Grace to bed, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have another child," she said, her voice full of joy and a little nervousness. "Are you happy?" Xavier swept her into his arms, spinning her around the way he had spun Grace so many months ago. "Happy, Clara, I am beyond happy. I am blessed. We are going to have a baby, our baby. You do not mind that it will be hard, another mouth to feed?" "I do not mind anything," Xavier assured her. "We will manage. We always have. And I cannot wait to meet this little one." Their son was born the following spring in May of 1879. The labor was long and difficult, and Xavier paced the floor of their bedroom while the midwife attended to Clara. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he rushed in to find Clara exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "It is a boy," she said. "We have a son, Xavier." He sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny, perfect child in her arms and felt tears prick his eyes. "What should we name him?" he asked. "I thought perhaps James," Clara suggested. "After your father." Xavier nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. His father had died when Xavier was so young that he barely remembered him, but he knew his name and a few stories. To name his son after James Cole felt right, a way of honoring the past while building the future. "James Cole," he said aloud, testing the sound. "I like it." "James Thomas Cole, maybe, for your husband, so Grace has that connection to her father." Clara looked at him with such love that Xavier felt his breath catch. "You are a generous man," she said. "Thomas may not have been the husband I needed, but he gave me Grace, and for that I am grateful." "Thank you for honoring him." "He was part of your life," Xavier said simply. "That makes him part of our story." Life settled into a rhythm after James was born. Xavier worked hard, taking jobs at the lumber mill and sometimes guiding hunting parties through the mountains. Clara tended the house and garden, sold her sewing work to other women in town, and raised the children. It was not an easy life, but it was a good one, filled with love and laughter. Grace grew into a bright, curious child who followed Xavier around like a shadow whenever he was home. She loved the horses and begged to learn to ride. So Xavier taught her, patiently leading her around the meadow on a gentle mare until she was confident enough to go on her own. James was quieter, more thoughtful, but he had his father's steady nature and his mother's kind heart. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Xavier and Clara would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about the day's events, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands linked. It was in these moments that Xavier felt most grateful for the path his life had taken. "Do you ever think about that day I found you?" he asked Clara one evening when they had been married for 3 years. "In the storm." "Every day," Clara admitted. "I think about how close we came to dying and how you saved us. I think about how my whole life changed in that moment." "Mine too," Xavier said. "I was so lost before I met you. I did not even know I was lost, but I was. You gave me purpose, Clara, you and the children. You made me want to be a better man." "You were already a good man," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You just needed someone to see it. I am so grateful it was me." In 1882, Clara gave birth to their second son, whom they named David. And 2 years after that, a daughter arrived, whom they named Elizabeth but called Lizzie from the start. The house that had seemed so spacious now felt full to bursting with noise and life, but Xavier would not have changed a thing. Grace was 7 years old now, and she had started helping her mother with the younger children, displaying a natural maternal instinct. James was 5, serious and responsible beyond his years. David was 2, all energy and mischief. And baby Lizzie was the darling of them all, with Clara's brown eyes and Xavier's dark hair. Money was sometimes tight, but they always had enough. Xavier had expanded their land, buying the adjacent parcel, and he had built a larger barn. He kept horses now, breeding them and selling them to travelers and locals. It was good, steady work that allowed him to be home more, which was what he wanted most. The children grew, and so did Xavier's love for Clara. If anything, it deepened with the years, growing richer and more complex. They had weathered hard times together, illness and injury and seasons when money was scarce. They had celebrated good times together, birthdays and holidays and small everyday victories. Through it all, they had remained partners, best friends as well as lovers. One winter evening, when Grace was 11 years old, she asked Clara about her father, about Thomas. Xavier happened to be standing in the doorway, and he paused, unsure if he should make his presence known or give them privacy. Clara saw him and gestured for him to come in. "Your father was a good man," Clara told Grace gently. "He worked hard and he tried to do right by us. But he and I were not suited to each other, not the way Xavier and I are. When he died, I was sad, but I was also lost and scared. And then Xavier found us in the storm." "I do not remember Papa Thomas at all," Grace said. "I only remember Papa Xavier." Xavier felt his throat tighten. He came and sat beside Grace, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Your father loved you," he told her. "I know he did, because how could anyone not love you? And it is okay if you do not remember him. You were very small. What matters is that you know you are loved now and you always will be." "I know," Grace said, leaning into him. "You are my real papa, the one who matters." After Grace went to bed, Clara came to Xavier where he sat by the fire. She climbed into his lap, something she rarely did anymore now that they had so many children around, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You are a wonderful father," she said. "To all of them, but especially to Grace. You did not have to love her the way you do." "I could not help it," Xavier said honestly. "The moment I saw her, crying in your arms in that storm, my heart was hers, just like it was yours." "I love you, Xavier Cole," Clara said, kissing him. "I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "And I love you," he replied. "You are my whole world, Clara. You and our children. Everything good in my life started the day I found you." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always more joy than sorrow. Xavier's horse breeding business prospered, and eventually he was able to hire help, which meant more time with his family. Clara's sewing had turned into a small business as well, with women coming from all over the region to commission dresses and quilts. Grace grew into a beautiful young woman, strong and capable like her mother, with a gift for working with animals. She helped Xavier with the horses, and he taught her everything he knew about breeding and training them. James showed an interest in carpentry and apprenticed with a builder in town. David wanted to be a doctor, inspired by old Dr. Mitchell, who was still practicing though his hair had gone white. Lizzie was still young, but she showed signs of inheriting her mother's skill with a needle. In 1890, Grace married a young rancher named Peter Dawson, and Xavier walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. She looked so much like Clara had on their wedding day, radiant and full of hope. At the reception, Grace pulled Xavier aside. "Thank you, Papa," she said, "for everything. For saving Mama and me, for loving us, for being the best father I could have asked for." Xavier hugged her tightly. "Thank you for letting me be your father," he said. "You have been a joy and a blessing from the very start." When Grace and her new husband left for their own home, Xavier stood on the porch with Clara, watching them ride away. "It is strange," he said, "seeing her all grown up. It seems like just yesterday that she was a baby crying in the storm." "It does," Clara agreed, "but we raised her well, Xavier. She will be happy." "Because she knows what love looks like," Xavier said. "We showed her that. We show all of them that every day." The years rolled on, bringing grandchildren and more changes. James married and had 2 sons. David went off to medical school in San Francisco, making good on his dream. Lizzie grew into a talented seamstress who took over much of Clara's work. And Grace had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, who loved coming to visit their grandparents' ranch. Xavier and Clara grew older, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with age, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by decades of shared life. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, still holding hands. One evening in the summer of 1897, when Xavier was 60 years old and Clara was 51, they sat together as usual, surrounded by the sound of grandchildren playing in the yard. Grace had brought her family for a visit, and the ranch was full of noise and laughter. "Do you remember when it was just the 3 of us?" Clara asked, watching her daughter chase her youngest son around the garden. "You, me, and baby Grace in that little house in town." "I do," Xavier said. "And I remember thinking then that I could not possibly be any happier. I was wrong. It just keeps getting better." "That is because we built something real," Clara said. "Something that will last beyond us. Our children, our grandchildren, they are our legacy, Xavier. They are proof that love can survive anything, even winter storms and impossible odds." Xavier pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "You are my legacy," he said. "Everything else is just extra. You are the one who changed my life, who made me believe in permanence and family and love. I found you in the winter wind, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed." "And I found you in my darkest moment," Clara replied. "When I had given up hope, you appeared and saved me. Saved us. And then you loved us and kept loving us for all these years. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Xavier corrected. "That storm brought us together, and I will be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Around them, their family laughed and played, the sound of it filling the evening air like music. This was what happiness looked like, Xavier thought. Not a single perfect moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together, made beautiful by love and dedication, and the choice to keep choosing each other every day. Grace came over to them, her youngest daughter on her hip. "Mama, Papa, we are going to have supper soon. Will you come inside?" "In a minute," Xavier said. "We are just enjoying the view." Grace smiled knowingly and went back to the house. Clara laughed softly. "She thinks we are being sentimental old people." "We are sentimental old people," Xavier pointed out, "and I would not have it any other way." As the years continued to pass, Xavier and Clara settled into the comfortable rhythm of their elder years. They watched their children build their own lives and raise their own families. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, as was the way of life. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's anchor. In 1905, Dr. Mitchell passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84. The whole town mourned him, but none more than Xavier and Clara, who remembered how he had saved their lives that first terrible night. They attended his funeral together, holding hands, remembering the kindness he had shown them. "He was there at the beginning of our story," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "He helped save us." "He did," Xavier agreed, "and we lived a life that honored that saving. We did not waste the gift we were given." That same year, they celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary, though Xavier always counted from the day he found Clara in the storm, which made it 28 years since they had come into each other's lives. The family gathered at the ranch for a big party, all the children and grandchildren, and even some of the great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive. Grace stood up to make a speech, her voice strong and clear. "I want to thank my parents," she said, "for showing me what love looks like. For teaching me that family is not just about blood, but about choice. Papa Xavier chose to love Mama and me, even though we were strangers. He chose to stop in that storm to help us, to make us his family. And because of that choice, all of us are here today. Every person in this room exists because one man heard a baby crying in the winter wind and decided to help." There was not a dry eye in the house when she finished. Xavier stood and pulled Clara into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply, and everyone cheered. The twilight years of their lives were peaceful. Xavier eventually stopped working with the horses, turning that business over to James and his sons. Clara's hands grew too stiff with arthritis to sew, so Lizzie took over completely. They spent their days together, taking slow walks around the ranch, sitting in the sun, telling stories to the grandchildren who came to visit. One spring morning in 1910, when Xavier was 73 years old, he woke to find Clara still asleep beside him. He watched her for a long moment, taking in every detail of her face, still beautiful to him despite the years. Her hair was white now, her face deeply lined, but when she opened her eyes and smiled at him, he saw the same woman he had pulled from the storm all those years ago. "Good morning, my love," she said, her voice raspy with sleep. "Good morning," he replied, kissing her forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Old," Clara admitted with a laugh, "but happy. Always happy when I wake up next to you." They rose and dressed slowly, their movements careful with age, and went to sit on their porch with coffee. The ranch was quiet, most of the children grown and gone to their own homes, though James and his family lived in a house on the other side of the property and often came by. "Do you have any regrets?" Clara asked him suddenly. Xavier considered the question carefully. "Not one," he said finally. "My life has been better than I ever dreamed it could be. What about you?" "Only one," Clara said, and Xavier felt a momentary panic until she continued. "I regret that we did not have more time. I want another 50 years with you, Xavier Cole. I want forever." "We have had forever," Xavier told her gently. "Maybe not in length, but in depth. We have lived more in our years together than many people live in twice the time." We have loved deeply and fully. We have raised children and seen them have children of their own. We have built something beautiful. That is forever, Clara. That is the only kind of forever that really exists." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "You are right," she said, "as you usually are. I am just greedy. I never want this to end." "It will not end," Xavier promised. "What we have built will go on. Our children will tell their children about us, and those children will tell their children. The love we made will echo down through generations. That is immortality, Clara. That is how we live forever." In the summer of 1912, Clara became ill with pneumonia. Despite David's best efforts, now a skilled doctor himself, she grew weaker. Xavier sat by her bedside day and night, holding her hand, talking to her, remembering their life together. All the children came, gathering around her, saying their goodbyes though they hoped she would recover. On a warm August evening, with the windows open and a gentle breeze blowing through, Clara squeezed Xavier's hand weakly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for stopping, for helping, for loving us." "Thank you for asking," Xavier replied, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for letting me love you. You made my life worth living, Clara. You were everything." "We will find each other again," Clara said with certainty. "If there is any justice in the universe, we will find each other again." "I will be looking for you," Xavier promised. "In every storm, in every winter wind, I will be looking for you." Clara smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "I love you, Xavier Cole, always and forever." "I love you, Clara Cole," he said. "My wife, my love, my whole heart." She passed quietly in the night, surrounded by family, her hand still clasped in Xavier's. The funeral was attended by half the county, testimony to the life she had lived and the people she had touched. Xavier stood beside her grave and told the story one more time, of how he had found her crying in the winter wind, how she had asked for help, how he had said he would. "She gave me everything," he said to the gathered crowd. "Love, family, purpose, joy, all because I stopped to help." Let that be my message to you all. Never pass by someone in need. You never know what blessing might come from a simple act of kindness. Xavier lived for 3 more years after Clara died. They were lonely years despite being surrounded by family. He had lost his other half, his partner, his love. But he did not spend those years in despair. Instead, he poured all his remaining energy into his family, spending time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother, making sure they understood where they came from. On a cold December morning in 1915, Xavier woke feeling different. He was not in pain, just tired in a way that went bone deep. He called for James, who came quickly, and he gathered all the children who were nearby. "It is time," Xavier said simply. "I am going to see your mother again." They protested, but Xavier just smiled. "I have had a good life," he said. "Better than good. Blessed. I found love when I thought I would drift forever. I had a family when I thought I would die alone. And now I am going home to Clara. Do not be sad, be grateful as I am grateful." Grace held his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Tell Mama we love her," she said. "I will," Xavier promised. "And remember what I always told you. Love is a choice. Choose it every day. Choose to be kind. Choose to help. Choose to build something that lasts. That is the secret to a good life." As the sun set on that December day, Xavier Cole closed his eyes for the last time. His last thought was of a young woman in a storm, holding a crying baby, asking for help. And in his mind, he said again what he had said then: "I will." The story of Xavier and Clara Cole became legend in Truckee and the surrounding areas. People told it for generations. The tale of the cowboy who found a woman and baby dying in a winter storm and chose to save them, and in saving them, found his own salvation. Their ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Their descendants prospered and spread throughout California and beyond, but they all knew the story of their beginning. On the wall of the old ranch house, there hung a photograph, faded with age. It showed a young man and woman on their wedding day, standing close together, looking at each other with eyes full of love. Beside them stood a little girl in a white dress, her hand in the man's, her smile bright and trusting. And beneath the photograph, someone had written in careful script, "He found a baby crying in the winter wind. The mother said, 'Please help.' The cowboy said, 'I will.'" And from that moment, a love story began that would last forever. And it did. The ranch thrived for decades after Xavier and Clara passed. Grace's children took over its management, maintaining the horse breeding business their grandfather had started and expanding it to include cattle. They built new barns and fences, modernized where necessary, but kept the original house exactly as it had been, a shrine to the love story that had started there. Every year on the anniversary of that fateful winter day, when Xavier found Clara and baby Grace, the family would gather at the ranch. They would tell the story again, making sure each new generation understood their heritage. The youngest children would sit wide-eyed, hearing about the cowboy who rode through a blizzard to save strangers, about the love that grew from that act of kindness. David Cole, who had become a respected doctor in San Francisco, made sure to attend every year despite the journey. He would bring his own children and later his grandchildren, and he would tell them about growing up on the ranch, about watching his parents' love deepen with every passing year. "They taught me what it means to be a good person," he would say. "My father could have ridden past that wagon, many men would have, but he stopped, and that choice changed everything. It created all of us. Never underestimate the power of choosing kindness." Lizzie, who had married a shopkeeper in Truckee and stayed in the town her whole life, kept her mother's sewing box and her father's saddle, displaying them in her home like the treasures they were. She would touch them sometimes when she was old, remembering how her mother's hands had moved so surely with needle and thread, how her father had taught her to ride when she was small, his patience endless. James, the carpenter who had built so many homes in the area, made it his mission to maintain the ranch house perfectly. He replaced boards when needed, fixed the porch, kept everything exactly as his parents had left it. "This house represents something," he would say. "It represents what can be built when two people truly love each other. I will not let it fall apart." As the years turned into decades, the story of Xavier and Clara became intertwined with the history of Truckee itself. The little town that had sheltered them during that hard winter grew and changed, but the old-timers always remembered. They remembered the young cowboy who had carried a frozen woman and baby through a blizzard. They remembered the couple who had built a life on kindness and love. The Cole family became pillars of the community. They funded the first library in Truckee, naming it after Clara, who had loved to read. They donated land for a park, which was named after Xavier. They sponsored scholarships for young people who wanted to study medicine, like David, or carpentry, like James. They carried on the tradition of kindness that Xavier and Clara had started. Grace lived to be 87 years old, dying peacefully in 1953 surrounded by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. On her deathbed, she told the story one last time, her voice weak but certain. "I do not remember the storm," she said. "I was too young, but I remember everything after. I remember Papa Xavier's strong hands and gentle voice. I remember how he would lift me onto his shoulders and carry me around the ranch. I remember how he looked at Mama like she was the sun and moon and stars all together. And I remember thinking, even as a little girl, that this was what love looked like. This was what it meant to be a family, and I've tried my whole life to recreate that feeling, to give my children what he gave me: absolute security in being loved. Her children held her hands as she passed, and they buried her next to her husband Peter, but they made sure her headstone read Grace Foster Cole Dawson, beloved daughter of Xavier and Clara Cole, because that is how she had always identified herself: a daughter of that great love story. The ranch stayed in the family into the 21st century. Each generation added their own touches, but preserved the core of what Xavier and Clara had built. The bedroom where Clara had died was kept as a memorial, with her sewing basket still sitting by the chair, Xavier's hat hanging on the wall. The porch where they had sat countless evenings remained, the wood replaced many times but the structure unchanged. Visitors came from all over to see the place: historians interested in the settlement of the Sierra Nevada, genealogists tracing family lines, romantics who had heard the story and wanted to see where it happened. The Cole family welcomed them all, sharing the story generously, never tiring of telling it, because it was a story worth telling. In a world that often seemed harsh and uncaring, the story of Xavier and Clara reminded people that kindness mattered, that love could flourish in the hardest circumstances. That family was not just about blood but about choice and commitment, and showing up every single day. The photograph from their wedding day was reproduced countless times, handed down through the family, displayed in homes from California to New York. Each descendant had a copy, a reminder of where they came from. And beneath each copy, that same inscription: "He found a baby crying in the winter wind. The mother said, 'Please help.' The cowboy said, 'I will.'" It became a family motto of sorts. When someone was in trouble, when life got hard, the Coles would remember Xavier and Clara. They would remember that the right choice was always to help, to stop, to say, "I will," when someone asked for assistance. It was their heritage and their responsibility. In 2015, 138 years after Xavier found Clara and Grace in the storm, the family held a special reunion at the ranch. Over 300 people came, all descendants of that original trio. They ranged in age from infants to elderly, and they came from all over the country. For 1 week, the ranch was alive with Cole family members, all of them connected by that single act of kindness so many generations ago. On the last night of the reunion, they gathered on the land where Xavier and Clara's house had stood. The house itself was now a museum of sorts, carefully preserved. They lit candles, 300 points of light in the darkness, and the eldest member of the family, Grace's great-grandson Robert, told the story one more time. He was 90 years old, and his voice shook with emotion as he spoke of the great-great-grandparents he had never met, but who had shaped his entire life. He told of the storm, the rescue, the love that had grown. He told of the family that had been built on that foundation. And he ended with the words that had been passed down through 5 generations. "We are here because a cowboy chose kindness. We exist because a stranger said, 'I will.' Never forget that. Never forget where we came from. And never pass by someone in need, because you never know what blessing might come from helping them." The 300 voices rose together in the darkness, repeating the words, "I will, I will, I will." It echoed across the meadow, across the years, across the generations. And if spirits could hear the living, then somewhere, Xavier and Clara Cole heard those voices and smiled. Their legacy lived on, not just in blood and DNA, but in values and choices, in kindness offered and accepted, in love that had started in a winter storm and had never ended. Because love like that does not end. It transforms. It multiplies. It echoes through time, touching people who will never know the original source but who benefit from its ripples nonetheless. Xavier and Clara's love had created a family that now numbered in the hundreds. But more than that, it had created a template for how to live, how to love, how to be human in the best possible way years after that reunion, long after all who had known Xavier and Clara personally had passed away. Their story remained. It was written in books about the settling of the West. It was taught in local schools as part of Truckee's history. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, a reminder of a simpler time when a man's word meant something, when kindness was its own reward, when love could conquer even the harshest winter. And always, always, the story ended the same way, with a promise. A cowboy's promise to help, which had turned into a lifetime commitment. A promise that had been kept every day for nearly 40 years. A promise that had created something beautiful and lasting and true. The descendants of Xavier and Clara Cole carried that promise forward into their own lives. They helped neighbors in need. They stopped for strangers with car trouble. They volunteered and donated and showed up when others needed them. Because they knew that they existed because someone had once made that choice, had once said, "I will," when it would have been easier to ride past. The ranch eventually became a historical site, preserved by the family trust that had been set up to maintain it. Visitors could walk through the house, see the bedroom where Xavier and Clara had slept, the kitchen where Clara had cooked for her growing family, the porch where they had sat watching sunsets. They could stand in the meadow and imagine a cowboy riding through a blizzard, carrying a woman and baby to safety, and many visitors left changed by what they saw and heard. They left determined to be kinder, to help more, to build something lasting in their own lives. The story of Xavier and Clara had that power. It reminded people of what mattered, of what was truly important in the end. That was the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch or the business or even the large family, though all of those things mattered. The greatest legacy was the impact of their love on others, the way their story inspired people to be better, to do better, to love better. Xavier Cole had been a drifting cowboy with no family and no home. Clara Foster had been a desperate widow with a baby facing death in a winter storm. And from that unpromising beginning, they had built something extraordinary, a love that lasted, a family that prospered, a legacy that would never fade, because in the end, love is the only thing that truly lasts. Everything else fades away: money, property, fame, power, but love remains. Love echoes through generations. Love changes the world, one small act of kindness at a time. And it all started with a man who heard a baby crying in the winter wind, who heard a mother beg for help, and who said those two simple words that changed everything. "I will."